There's about 25 to 27 different cacti species in the Mojave and a smaller number of succulents, so we're trying to reach those numbers. So we are looking for those specialty growers that have unusual specimens, and Mojave cacti, you can't find them all over the place. And so a lot of these specialty growers have those specific species that we're looking for.
We're very particular about picking specific cacti and succulents with impeccable pedigrees and the paperwork to prove it.
The value of the collection increases with the better documentation that you have. This has a higher value because we know its provenance and we know where it came from.
And because we know it has just the wild side we want.
I mean, we're trying to get wild collected. Either the seed was collected and they were grown from wild seed, or they were taken from wild cuttings or propagules. And so we're trying to do as much of that as possible. We're not going to be able to do that completely, but that would be our ultimate goal.
As well as collecting some backup plants because of the demands of what can be a tricky transplantation process.
Sometimes you need 2 or 3 or 4 because you'll never know. I mean, many of the plants won't take greenhouse environments, so they're sitting outdoors, but if we get a real cold freeze and these plants are sitting in their containers, they're not in the ground, they could be susceptible to damage. So that's why we collect more than just one of each.
It's also why we're so mindful of our design and planting schedule for this next phase of the Mojave collection.
We're kind of looking at different areas and designs to actually implement the collection onto the Springs Preserve, then we'll start planting at that point.
While paying particular attention to the seasonal needs of each potential transplant.
Well, depending on the species, there'll be a time of year when it's best to plant them. So it could be now in winter. A lot of the different cacti species could be planted now. Some of the other succulents might have to wait until springtime as the weather warms up and get them acclimated to our specific regional climate and temperatures that we have here.
Which is especially important in the case of one succulent that you might find only in the most exceptional settings, out in the desert or at the Springs Preserve.
It's a Dudleya. Yeah, it's a native succulent that we have here. It has a very fine niche. If you look at it closely, it looks like it would be fairly sensitive to our hot Mojave climate, but there are those micro niches in canyons and crevices where they do just fine. And so it's finding those areas and recreating that in our garden so that they can survive, so that we can interpret those as well.
Along with the other native species that you're unlikely to see unless you've looked as carefully as we have for specimens like the blue diamond cholla.
From the Blue Diamond area, it is native to southern Nevada and pretty restricted to southern Nevada. And so we have some examples of it here. We were able to get a specimen. Actually, it wasn't from this area, but we can use this for interpretive purposes to show people what the Blue Diamond cholla looks like, because it does have a very restricted habitat, and you don't find it all over the Mojave.
But soon, the blue diamond cholla and other notable members of our Mojave collection will be available for daily viewing so that people can see just how special and educational these species really are and why we just had to have them.
As people walk through the cactus area and even some other areas, you're going to see some interpretive signage and a few changes where we'll be highlighting these species and the collection that we're now procuring. So it'll just be a kind of a new chapter into the gardens and the interpretation of the gardens.